So when you're invited to give a TED Talk, they actually send you a list of do's and don'ts to observe while preparing your presentation. And one of the first ones is something along the lines of, thou shalt not start with a traditional introduction of your background. And so of course I'm going to start my talk with a traditional introduction of my background. I was born and raised in West Philadelphia, in that part of town, and had a pretty traditional childhood. Had a good group of friends, a decent family, and spent a lot of the time just hanging out playing basketball around the school. Until one day, another group of kids who, by all accounts, were just up to no good, started instigating trouble. And so one thing led to another. I got into a little fight, and I'm sorry, that's the plot of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. I get confused sometimes because there's so many similarities between Will and myself. Not least of which are devilish good looks and a penchant for parachute pants in the late 80s, early 90s. But in all reality, my life was turned around by one simple, seemingly innocuous event. Going back for as far as I can remember, I've always wanted to make my mark in the world of business. And so growing up, I worked hard, I got decent grades, and thought that corporate America, that big business, was the promised land. And so when I graduated school, I landed a job in finance, and I thought, well, now I've made it. Right? I've got the tools, the motivation, and the excitement to really go out and make a difference in the world. And then one day I came into the office, around 8:15, give or take, and I found this little note taped to my computer monitor. So take a moment to let that little gem sink in all its glory. And I realized that someday, somehow, I had to find a way to control my own destiny. And I knew at that point, after seeing that note, that I had to become an entrepreneur eventually. And I'm not alone in that. A recent study actually asked the question of entrepreneurs, why did you start your business? And over 75% answered that they wanted to control their own destiny and pursue their passions. Now, none of this is new news, right? There's over 27 million small businesses in the US. Over 50% of the US GDP comes from these small businesses. And surprisingly, over 75% of all new jobs come from small business. But I think this is just the beginning. I think we are now seeing the start of a major social and economic shift. And I'm here tonight to tell you that while the 20th century was dominated by the Fortune 500, I believe that the future belongs to the Fortune 5 million. So this shift really comes down to three main drivers. First is structural changes in the economy. The second is an increasing interest in niche products. And the third is ever-lowering barriers to entry. So during the Great Recession, we lost about 8 million jobs. And the sad fact is that the vast majority of these jobs simply aren't coming back. Why? Well, two reasons. First, in many cases, we just had the wrong people in the wrong place with the wrong skills. But second, and perhaps most importantly, businesses are simply becoming more efficient. So one of the interesting side effects of the recession is that it really hastened the inevitable, which is the dismissal of millions of people whose skills have been displaced by new technology and international trade. So now what we have in this society is a pool of people who are skilled, they're experienced, and they're simply waiting, poised to become these accidental entrepreneurs, so to speak, people who are starting new businesses by necessity. The next big trend that we see is that there's a renewed demand in niche products. The vast reach of the internet and the low-cost advent of social media marketing has enabled businesses to really cater to the most obscure of consumer demands. How else, of course, do you explain the beard hat? And finally, and again, most importantly, barriers to starting a business have never been lower, due mostly to the relentless advancement of technology. So let's say one day you're walking down the street and you're struck by inspiration, eureka, you've got this brilliant idea for an innovative new product, it's got a built-in demand, and it's going to really change lives. I'm referring, of course, to the children's beard hat. Well, now all you need to do is fire up your computer, create an Etsy account, and you can start doing the Lord's work, bringing the children's beard hat to the masses. So we now know that the future belongs to the Fortune 5 million, to these small business owners. But the question is, what kind of future is it going to be? You see, there's one tiny little problem, and that's that entrepreneurial ventures, small businesses in particular, have this nasty habit of failing. Why? Well, there's a lot of reasons why, but one of the biggest ones is actually financial illiteracy. So that same study I cited earlier also had the interesting tidbit that over 25% of business owners couldn't name the major expenses in their business. Even worse is the fact that over half of these business owners finance their business with their personal credit cards. And sadly, over half of them fail in the first 5 years, which destroys everything they've worked so hard to build. It's a big problem, and it's one that's only going to get larger as we see this influx of new and inexperienced entrepreneurs hit the economy. But don't worry too much just yet, because these challenges are not insurmountable. In fact, I believe that if we focus our efforts and resources on 3 major initiatives, we can provide an environment where current and future entrepreneurs can find long-term success. So first up is education. You know, the first thing we need to do as a culture is really focus on instilling basic business education as part of the core curriculum throughout a student's entire education. Because these students are faced with a new normal out there, and they need to be able to thrive in this new environment. It's the first and perhaps most important step to preparing the next generation for the new economy, and also combating the scourge of financial illiteracy. We also need to be able to empower existing entrepreneurs to get the information they need when they need it, quickly and easily. Traditional business education is completely inadequate in this regard. It's expensive, rigid, and time-consuming. So we can solve this by creating resources that draw on existing sources for business owners. Everything from open source education through some of the nation's greatest universities, all the way through to crowdsourced contributors and industry experts that can provide point-in-time education exactly when the business owner needs it. Next up is technology. We need to be able to continue to encourage the innovation and adoption of new technologies that improve the efficiency of these small businesses. The Fortune 5 million is going to have to do more with less, and so we need to empower these business owners with tools and resources that are able to empower them ultimately to handle their own sales, marketing, accounting, and finances easily and quickly. And there's some good tools out there now, but ultimately they're still too expensive and too difficult to use. And so that's an area that we have to really promote across the board. And finally, we have to change our cultural expectations, particularly as it pertains to how we view careers. You know, traditionally, we've encouraged people to pursue a single lifetime career with a single company in a particular field. And success has been determined by, ultimately, meeting the expectations of the boss and keeping one's head down long enough to slowly progress in the organization. And this has had a tragic result for our society, and that's that passive and mediocre employees have been able to find career success by simply checking the boxes. And that's, unfortunately, no longer the case. We are all entrepreneurs now. So we need to get back to our roots as a society and cherish the entrepreneurial spirit that has made this country great. And we're seeing the start of this already. Peter Thiel, the famous venture capitalist and entrepreneur, recently started the 20 Under 20 Foundation, which encourages bright young men and women to actually avoid the traditional route of college and instead start their own entrepreneurial ventures, learning as they go. And so what we see now is if we're able to return and put our focus back on the culture of entrepreneurship across demographics, we're going to be able to redefine how we as a society view success. We're going to be able to go back and have a renewed focus on individual responsibility, business acumen, and financial literacy that, if it becomes the new norm, can usher in an entire new wave of economic development. So we know that the world is changing. We know that the millions of jobs that we've lost are not likely to return anytime soon. We know that consumer demands are changing, and we also know that barriers to entry have never been lower. We know that the expectations we've all had about our careers and how we define success has gone out the window. And whether we like it or not, we all have to be entrepreneurs, regardless of what we do. But the good news is, if we are able to renew our focus on education, renew our focus on adopting and creating new technologies that improve efficiency, and fostering a culture of entrepreneurship throughout the society, we will be able to meet and surpass any challenges that come our way. So ultimately, we know that the future belongs to the Fortune 5 million, and I, for one, am very excited for that. Thank you.